Oh. Okay. All right, so welcome everyone to this data wrangling workshop using Pandas and scientific notebooks, which is part of the Data Science Friday workshops, first of the year, as Shivani mentioned. So we're excited and honored to be the first of 2023. We are, I'm Maddie Balcade. I'm an assistant professor in the computer science department in the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. And my co-instructor today is Andy Yu. He's a graduate student in the computer science department, a former biologist, or a biologist in a former life, I should say, and also someone who's doing his actual master's work on pandas and extending pandas. So this is exciting for both of us to be here and talk about pandas. Topic that we're going to cover, as we discussed, is pandas as a tool or as a fundamental tool for doing data wrangling and data science. It's by far the most popular tool for doing data wrangling in Python language. It is unfortunately a topic that is covered in greater length in a course that I teach on data science, introduction to data science, and we only have 2 hours. So as opposed to going in depth and covering pandas in greater depth, we have chosen to focus on some concepts are fundamental to understanding how the library works, and which makes it easier once you understand to read the documentation and understand what the documentation is all about, to read code that is distributed as part of research or that is contributed by other colleagues. Okay, so just a few points about the logistics. So the workshop is made up of 6 short lessons. The first 4 will proceed as follows. So we'll start by reviewing the material in a slide format. So this is the same material that's going to be available to you on the web page or in Jupyter Notebooks. I'll explain what Jupyter Notebooks and the slides on the websites are. We'll cover the material very briefly on the slides, and then we'll move on to an exercise that is meant to put into practice the concept that we covered in the lesson. So just give you an example, or I'll give an example in a second. So this is how the first 4 lessons will proceed. Then we'll do the last 2 lessons. So hopefully the first 4 lessons will take us about 1 hour, 15 minutes, or 1 hour and 20 minutes. And then we'll do 2 sets of slides that cover the last practical part of the workshops. And you'll have about 30 to 40 minutes to complete the exercises in the last 2 lessons. So although Pandas is fairly intuitive to understand, even without knowing Python, we do expect that everyone here knows some Python, as it helps understand the syntax and complete the exercises. So we're going to take a break around 3 or 3:15. Okay, so let's start with sharing my screen. Okay, so all the materials that we're going to present is available on the Change Hawaii Moria website. So if you go to change-hawaii, I'm going to post this on the Slack, on the Zoom chat. If you go on this page, if you go on the page without the extension, just changehawaii.github.io, this is the repository where all the workshops are going to be published. So ours is the 9th in this series. So if you click on modules and you browse down to the 9th workshop, it is data wrangling, and click on that icon. It will show you all the lessons that I was talking about. So these are lessons 1 through 7. And every lesson, if you click on lesson 1, every lesson has a full written out text, which will be summarized in the slides that I'm going to be presenting. For instance, this is the slides for data wrangling 1. It contains all the code, so you can either work off the slides or work off the notebooks. So the notebooks, to access the notebooks in an environment that allows you to execute code, every lesson that has some code in it has this launch binder icon. So if you click on the launch binder icon, something's going to happen. It's going to open this binder thing website. Binder is just an environment that allows you to execute Jupyter Notebooks that contains Python code without having to install anything locally on your machine. So eventually, when the first time you click it, it may take a minute to load, but eventually when it loads, you're going to see that there is a notebooks folder right here. If you click on that notebooks folder, you will be presented with all the notebooks that we covered. So essentially, these notebooks are, these are not the right links. Okay, can you put that binder link on the Slack chat? So change of plans. So please don't click on, you don't have to click on the link on the page itself, on the Moria page. Let me go back and show you what I mean. So don't click on this link here. Andy is going to put another link on the chat, and that's the link that you should use. So when you enter that link, when you browse to that URL, it would show you the same binder file that I mentioned, except that the notebooks will be slightly different. They will have the full-on text that I'm presenting here. Okay.
The link will be on Zoom?
The link will be on Zoom in a minute. Andy is going to copy paste it on Zoom. He's not on Zoom, but he will. Okay, so we don't need the link right away. I'm going to start by doing a brief intro to this workshop. So data wrangling introduction. So what we're going to cover today is why are Jupyter Notebooks, or in this first lesson, useful for cleaning and wrangling data. We're going to understand how Jupyter Notebooks provide a method documenting the steps involved in cleaning and wrangling data. So why Pandas and Jupyter Notebooks? One of the most important topics in research these days is reproducibility and transparency. And one of the best ways to achieve reproducibility and transparency is by, one, documenting your code in such a way that it's reproducible by anyone who downloads and uses your notebooks. Also, transparency involves writing code that is understandable, code that is well documented, code that sort of makes sense. The steps that you carry on for your analysis make sense. And the best way to achieve this, not according to me, but according to scientific publications expert in the field, is by using scientific notebooks. So Jupyter Notebook is a type of scientific notebook. It's essentially a way to run code in a browser. It's a way to run not only code, but to document that code using rich media. For instance, in your notebook, you can have text, you can have HTML, you can add images, you can add videos, you can leave in JavaScript if it helps document and explain the topics that you discuss in your notebook. So in fact, the slides that I'm working off of right now are generated from Jupyter Notebooks. So you can save your notebook as an HTML page that people can reuse and execute. You can save it as a PDF that you can add on to your paper as supplementary material, or you can convert it into slides and use it to present in a workshop like I'm doing today. So that hopefully justifies why Jupyter Notebooks, but why are we using Pandas and Python? So Python I think, has established itself as one of the most popular languages for doing data science. And Pandas is a very rich library that has provided a lot of tools and simplified doing a lot of the complex things in data science. So using Pandas, you can read in a variety of text formats from Excel to JSON to XML tables if you want, and do a lot of complex things on those tables. You can wrangle the data, you can clean it up, you can compute complex statistics on time series, and so on and so forth. So the combination of Pandas, Python, and Jupyter Notebooks provide an ecosystem that is very rich and makes data science reproducible, transparent, and promotes overall integrity and the advancement of knowledge in science. So with that said, Just want to mention that this workshop does not cover how, as I mentioned earlier on, does not cover how to write basic Python code, how to set up a notebook environment. Here we're going to use Binder, which is an environment that allows you to execute code. But there are a lot of ways that you can set up a Jupyter Notebook or run on the cloud without setting one, including Google's service called Colab. So Colab essentially is a way to run Jupyter Notebooks. And also just to mention that Jupyter Notebooks support other languages. So for people who work in R or Julia or other data science popular languages, they can also use Jupyter Notebooks. So I mentioned briefly what Jupyter Notebooks are. Emphasize that they're interactive, user-friendly environments for data analysis and visualizations. They're not novel by any means. The concept of a scientific notebook has existed for many decades, but they reinvented the concept, added a lot of tools under the same sort of umbrella, and made it possible to run in a browser, which makes it, running in a browser is ideal for sharing with people. They allow for clear documentation of the analysis process. So you're no longer constrained to documenting your code using comments, dash and adding the comment. You can document using rich media, you can document using HTML or Markdown and so on and so forth. They facilitate collaboration. So a lot of the tools that support Jupyter Notebooks allow multiple people to edit those notebooks at the same time, and multiple programming languages. And last but not least, they're widely used in data science and machine learning. Pretty much any data science team that does any sort of rigorous data science is probably going to be using Jupyter Notebooks to do their work. Okay, so we're going to skip this. We're supposed to do the whole presentation on something called Sage 3, but as I mentioned earlier on, to access the code or the Jupyter Notebooks themselves, all you have to do is copy the link that was shared on chat and open that link in a browser. So I'm going to open this link in a browser. It's going to open the Binder environment. So Binder, as I mentioned, is just a way to host and execute those Jupyter Notebooks. And this is what I'm going to see once this open. I'll give it a minute to load and finish talking about my slides. Okay. All right, so when you browse through the notebooks, you're going to see that notebooks are listed here, but you also have access to the slides that I'm using for presenting. But stick to those notebooks that are at the root level. So every lesson will be associated to one of these notebooks, and I'm going to show you which ones are which. Okay, so I'm going to let Andy present the next 3 lessons, and after the break, I'll take over again and finish with you guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andy. I've got to follow my professor in lecturing basically what he teaches. But anyways, I'm really excited to have you guys all here. Happy Friday. Thanks for spending it with. Yeah. I'll be talking about Jupyter Notebooks, the interface of Jupyter Notebooks, which is that environment we're going to be working on to use Pandas. So some basic things we're going to cover are, like I said, the Jupyter Notebooks interface, as well as basic cell types that Jupyter Notebooks offers, and how to run different kinds of code blocks. Hopefully, with this lesson, we get a little bit more familiar with Jupyter Labs and its interface. So Manny mentioned this already, but this is basically what you see when you open a Jupyter Notebook. You have your launcher, which lets you launch a variety of different applications. Today we'll be using Jupyter Notebooks. And here's your directory. This directory will show you the different files, programs, anything that you have associated with said notebook. When you create a new notebook, this is what you're going to see: an untitled i.pynb Python notebook, IPython notebook. And some key features we want us to look at are the cell, which is what you're going to be typing your code or markdown in. this plus sign, which allows you to create a new cell, and this run button, which allows you to execute each individual cell. In Jupyter Notebooks, we have 3 types of cells. We have code cells, markdown cells, and raw cells. We don't really use raw cells. They treat everything as raw text. We're mostly focusing on code cells and markdown cells, and I believe most of you guys will find in your journey as data scientists, we'll be mostly working with code cells and markdown cells anyways. So code cells, as the name implies, very aptly named, it runs your code in whatever language is supported by the kernel you've selected. So when you open a Jupyter Notebook, you're able to select kernel, typically Python, which is what we're going to be working on today. Markdown cells are a language that allows you to write text and treats everything inside of them as like markdown text. So this is basically one big cell that we have here. This is all written in markdown, and instead of being seen as a code, it's visualized as text, as a flipping text. A key feature is that you can change the cell type using the drop-down menu right here. So here it's currently selected on code for this particular cell. If you click on that drop-down menu, you can select markdown, code, or raw text. Editing cells. So this is the meat of it right here. When you click on a code cell, you are able to edit said cell. You're able to add your code or modify your code in whichever way. With markdown, you have to double click it. It's a little nice feature that helps you differentiate cells, code cells from markdown. With markdown, if you click it once, it kind of outlines said cell in blue. So to let you know this is the markdown cell that you've got selected. You click it twice, and then you're able to actually open up said cell and modify your markdown code. Excuse me, your markdown. You're able to execute any markdown or code cell. A markdown cell, once you execute it, just displays your markdown. And for your code, you're able to execute it with this nice little play button over here, the run button. Let's see here. Oh, everyone's favorite shortcut, shift return, rather than going to each individual cell and clicking on that little run button. If you hit shift return on a cell that you have currently selected, it will run that cell. When you execute a cell, it'll have a really nice little unique execution number. These numbers identify the order of execution, which is important when you're working in a Jupyter Notebook, because you're able to execute cells in a different or an inconsistent order. As you can see, this looks linear, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but we are able to actually edit 1, 2, 5, 6, and then maybe this is 4 and come back to it again. What's important to note is that when you do this, you are not changing your entire notebook. So say in this example, we have a equals 2, and you print a, you have 2. But say you set a as 4 in a different cell, and then you set this, print a, you will get different results. So you need to keep this in mind when you're working with certain variables that you have lower in your notebook, and then you modify them. When you come back up top, they will not be the same. Does that make sense? I'm moving too fast. Not really good at this. This is a nice little tip. Make sure that you're always rerunning your code from the top using the menu option kernel, restart, and run all. Here's a little Jupyter Notebook cheat sheet with all of the aforementioned features: running a cell, changing cell type, your current kernel, and how to restart a kernel. Here's some key points that we covered. As we said, different types of cell types, how to run a cell, how to edit a cell, how to execute a cell, and how to rerun cells in order to avoid any mistakes. So we're actually going to go into an exercise. If you guys are following along in the full notebooks, you can see that we have our first exercise for Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter entries. Perfect. So simple exercise. Thank you, Maddie. Very simple exercise. With every exercise, we'll have solutions at the very bottom. In case you get lost, you really need help. Try to challenge yourself. Follow along. They're pretty simple. And if you need help, raise your hand. We can come help you along. That's the same for looking at you guys there. That's the same for you, Zoom. In this exercise, we'd like to create a mass converter in the cells below this exercise cell that you're looking at. Right here. I'll give you guys a few minutes, kind of read through the instructions, see if you guys can figure it out. See it? Questions, comments, concerns, feelings? Love that sound. Keyboard's clacking, typing along. Oh, right. Unfortunately, we only have 2 hours to spend together, so I'm going to just go on down to the solution. So here we needed to create 3 cells. One is a markdown cell, as you can see here in this little menu, markdown. We write text simply introducing our mass converter. Hey, this is a tool for converting kilograms to pounds. Execute it, and then write in 2 different code cells your function and plug in some number into function, make sure that your mass converter works. I believe up top I gave the formula. Yeah, 1 kilogram, 2.2. Your answer doesn't really matter as long as you're able to create a markdown cell, create a code cell. So just to demonstrate this just to demonstrate what I've just went over, if we were to create a new notebook, we'd come here, file, new notebook, right? That opens untitled, and then we select the kernel. For us, we'll be doing Python. Here we have a code cell by default. We can change it to a markdown cell, right? So markdown, Shift Enter, our favorite shortcut to execute that cell, turn it into, or visualize that markdown. Write some code, a equals 2. A. There you go. Any questions? Okay. Awesome. Maddie, how do we get to the next lesson? Cool. Now that we've introduced Jupyter Notebooks, let's talk about Pandas. Pandas is our data science library, very powerful tool that Dr. Belcade introduced earlier. In this lesson, we hope to talk about different Pandas data types, data structures, how to load data into Pandas, how to write data from Pandas to a file. Again, please raise your hand, let me know, Zoom. I think you guys have a raise hand function. Let me know if it's going too fast, have any questions. So in Pandas, we have two primary data structures. We have series and data frames. These are your best friends. If you guys are familiar with Excel or just tables in general, series can be imagined as your columns. Here we have described as an array or list-like collection of values. And data frames are your entire table. In Pandas, we have different data types. With the series and data frames, there are many functions that we can access using these Pandas series data frames. We can filter our data, we can sort it, we can convert data frames across different formats. One neat thing that Pandas always does is when you load a data set to it, it will try to infer the correct type of data type for each column. So say you give it a list of strings, it should be able to identify, hey, these are strings. This can be really helpful, but it doesn't always get it right, which is why it's important to know that we can always overwrite the data type assigned by Pandas. Say you have a number and you want to convert to something like, let's see here, a float or a bool, you can do that. And we will demonstrate shortly. It's important to know that there are many, wow, hundreds possibly types of file formats. You have excel.xlsx, you have plain text, huge array. Let's see here. For plain text files, we have two broad categories, delimited and fixed width. With delimited files, they are organized so that columns and rows are separated by a certain character, known as a delimiter. And fixed width files are separated just by some fixed number of characters. You're only able to add a certain number of characters per cell row. Plain text files are our most popular format when working in data science. It's pretty universal, and they're very nice, compact, concise. In this workshop, we will be working mostly with CSVs, except for a nice little exercise that we have. CSVs are delimited by comma-separated values, and rows are delimited by a new line. You can see here, this is an example of a CSV. As we mentioned, these values are separated by commas, and our rows are separated by new lines. Questions? No? Okay. Let's talk about reading in our CSV. So we have series and data frame. We can create series and data frames from scratch, say p.series equals something, or we can upload our data and create a data frame from data sets. The steps to do so would be to use read CSV, which is a Pandas function, to read your CSV file. You can do read Excel or read JSON. There are a variety of different reading options that Pandas supports. Here, for example, is how you read a CSV called some data. So this is important. Always import your library, import Pandas as PD. PD is the typical alias for Pandas when you're working with it. And I think you'll find if you look through most GitHub repos working with Pandas, they will alias it as PD. Anyways, we set a data frame, df equals pd.read CSV. Then you give it your file directory or your file path. So this is in the data folder. Some data.csv is its name. By just typing the variable name df that we loaded the CSV in, we can display our table from said CSV in a very nice human readable format. Read CSV and all the other read functions are able to take a variety of parameters, arguments, to help you better separate and better read, better digest your data sets, your files. Here, for example, we have comma-separated values. So we separate them by these lines. I don't know what they're called. TSV, tab separated, when separate on tabs, etc. When you want to read in or parse a small subset of your data, you can specify to your read function how many rows you want to read in. Here we have pd.read CSV, you have your file path, and then you have n rows equals 5. To learn more about the different sorts of methods and functions, you can visit the Pandas documentation. Headers and indexes. This is very important for accessing your data. Your headers or column labels and index or row labels allow you to basically find or specify certain values, certain columns, certain rows, certain cell types. By default, read CSV makes a few assumptions. The first being that your first row of your data set that you load in is your table header. Rows are indexed using integer values from 0 to n-1, where n is the number of rows in your data set. You can change this behavior by omitting the header or renaming columns, and you can change read CSV to read in only certain columns if you index it. So, for example, here we have our import pandas as PD. We read in our CSV, weird format CSV, and we separate it on these lines. As you can see, this is our base. This is our example right here. If our data set did not actually come with a header, like it did here, unnamed 0, column 1, column 2, column 3, it would take that first row as our header, which is not what we want, but we can fix that. Here we simply let read CSV know that there is no header, header equals none in the read CSV function, and then it will append this sort of automated 0, 1, 2, 3 basic header for you. Here we are parsing just 2 different rows, the first 2, n rows equals 2. And here's back to our base no headers table. As I mentioned, you can specify column names rather than just saying no headers. So you read in your CSV, whatever you're separating on, and the names of the columns that you want. This will appear in the order of the columns. So from left to right, it's column 1, 2, and 3. In this example, at least. We can also specify which columns are index column. Here that argument is index underscore column, and we set it as the very first column, 0. Missing values. This is very important because in real world data sets, we're often missing key values in different cells, rows, columns, etc. These missing values take many different shapes and forms. Here we have some examples: NA, N.A, 9, capital, lowercase, you name it. What we have to do is help pandas identify these specific missing values in a format, a data type called NaN, or not a number. The reason why we need to do this is some functions depend on properly identifying missing values. If you have, say, a column or a series with values 1, 2, 3, and this string unknown, you're going to throw an error because you're not able to take this average. In this example below, we take our no values example CSV file, and we notify it that, hey, our NA values are this string null with a capital N. Here you can see the example when we do not set null as, or when we do not set the NA values as null, you have all of these null strings that are not recognized in missing data types, but rather strings called null. Here with the NA values, those null values have become NaNs, which are a specified missing value data type. Any questions, people?
Yeah, I got a one. So when you are reading from the file, does the Pandas figure out the right data type, like numbers and the string?
It cut out. Can you repeat your question? We can barely hear you.
We could type it inside.
Or maybe you can type it in the chat.
Okay, can you okay?
We don't hear you very well.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, when you are reading from the CSV file, I wonder if the Pandas can figure out the data type of each column.
Yes, pandas will make an attempt to infer which data types they are, whether they're strings, integers, date times, but it doesn't always get it right. So we are able to override whatever pandas infers.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
So when you have like, say, missing data, I imagine that can come in a couple different formats. Like if, say, somebody just leaves like no space with 2 commas, I imagine it reads that as like there's nothing here or something. If someone, say, like in a string of numbers wrote like unknown as like text, would it just like read it as text and be like, this is the thing? Or could it like be like, hey, we found like these lines where there's like a thing that's different? I don't know if that's kind of more complicated, I guess. I guess more like what's like kind of the normal nature of missing values that Pandas is equipped to handle.
Okay. So
Dealing with that right now.
So Pandas is pretty powerful, but it's not absolute. This is an area of research for finding different types of corrupt or missing data values. It's a huge part of our data wrangling, which is data cleaning. But if for that specific example, say you had a number mixed in with a string, Pandas would not identify that this is a broken value. It would assume that this is a value you're giving it. What it would infer, I imagine, string probably, because it sees unknown in there, and numbers can be in a string text, so it would think you're trying to write unknown 1, 2, 3, something like that. Is there a function for finding all of these messy values? No. This is how we get paid. Yeah, exactly. When we take messy data sets and try to identify these null values and hidden values and clean it up for our clients for data analysis.
It does recognize the comments with no space between them or space between them. That's essentially
Okay, cool.
Cool. Yes. All right, moving on. Got a little bit more time. So once you're done working with the data frame, you might want to download said data frame in some sort of new form. Here we're able to take your data frame, use the method toCSV to write a CSV file from that data frame that we just worked with. So in this example here, we've got it nice and clean. We've replaced no values with NaNs. We want to work with it later, or we want to pass it on to a collaborator. We'd simply write that data frame to a CSV. There are a number of optional parameters to change delimiters, write automatically generated indexes, etc. Key points. Pandas contains numerous methods to help load, read, write, as we just said. And read CSV is highly customizable, as are the other read functions, to enable you to better read your messy data. Here we have another exercise. Again, I'll let you guys read through it. Give you a few minutes.
maybe if I can just add something. So we mentioned that the idea was not to introduce a deep overview or to do a deep overview of Pandas, but to introduce powerful fundamental concepts that you need to be familiar with. And one of the most important concepts is that the read CSV. So pretty much everything that you're going to read starts with read underscore something. There are tons of libraries that are supported or tons of functions that allow you to read all sorts of types of data, from JSON to CSV to TSV to XML, as I said. They all start with the read underscore something. And they all have tons of options to modify the behavior. Just like, for example, with read CSV, despite the fact that CSV typically is comma separated values and it's supposed to have commas, there is no standard. CSV is not a standardized format. And sometimes it has colons or it has pipes, the vertical bar. And so those parameters allow you to change the behavior. Say, hey, instead of splitting the line on commas, split it on pipes or split it on colons or whatever. And there are many, many, many other parameters that you can change in order to change the behavior of the function. And that a lot of the problems that you have with your data can be overcome by finding the right parameter and tweaking that parameter so that you avoid it. And the example is reading in null values. So that avoids a lot of steps that are necessary to find those missing values, convert those missing values. You can just say the missing value is unknown, or is null, or is whatever, space, and it would automatically replace those values for you. So the idea here is get familiar with the type of functions that you need to read whatever file types that you have, and the parameters of the functions. And one quick, very useful way to see what parameters the Pandas function has is by using the tab within the function. So if you go to a Jupyter
notebook and you type, for example, df, which is your data frame that you're going to read, import pandas as PD, and just execute the it's not installed. Great. Running on Binder. Huh. Does anyone have a problem running Pandas? Can you try import Pandas as PD?
No module found.
No module font. Okay. So if that happens, do just exclamation point. Pip install Pandas. Pandas. So if that happens, try to do this. So essentially, this means that the environment that you just installed or you're running in does not have Pandas installed. And all you have to do is run this command and it would do the Pandas, install Pandas for you. I'm going to show you how to. So once it does successfully, say successfully installed, if you do, you can import it again, import Pandas as PD, and you do PD dot read CSV. So I am pressing tab. Every time you press tab, it tries to do a command completion to show you what functions are available. So if I do dot command, it shows me what functions are available. If I do a read underscore, you see all the formats from hierarchical format, HDF, HTML, JSON, ORC, Parquet, Pickle, SAS. So literally dozens of possible functions that come packaged in, plus additional functions that you can download and use from the web. So read CSV, then I do the parentheses. And if I do a shift tab inside the parentheses, it shows me all the parameters. And you can see that it has dozens of possible parameters that you can change to change the behavior of the function. You can say what is the true. So for example, a Boolean, if you're reading a Boolean that is lowercase true, it's going to read it as a text. But you can change the parameters to say if whenever you see the value true with all lowercase, convert it into a Boolean as true. You can skip a footer. You can skip rows 1 to 10 because they contain, let's say, documentation. A lot of other parameters that allow you to overcome the default behavior and save you a substantial amount of time when you're writing data. So that's concept number one. Get familiar with the read function that you need to read your data.
So like captivating, you know, he's like really passionate about it. Fall 2023, ICS 438, I believe is the CRN or the code. Big data, data science tools, intro to data science. Let's see here. Maddie, where are you? Here it is, I got it.
Exercise. Yeah.
All right, moving on.
5 minutes for you. Sure. Yeah. So yeah, just take 5 minutes to complete the exercise if you haven't already, and we'll cover this. Thanks,
After this.
I get an error. Missing option of MC open pixel. Open pixel. And you can just like not every that's
No. There we go. Here you go.
And
For this one, it shows you.
should have.
There we go. Yeah. there. And then, so you may have an arrow saying that's open, go all the way down. If at the all the way down it says that PXL is not available, just do the same thing, just install it, pip install it. It's a library that allows you to read Excel format, which is, you know, proprietary format.
What is it called?
Which file?
Yeah,
so
that's
here's the
probably
trick. Go
right
there. Go here. Delete the last two characters of the XLSX and try to do tab and see if the file is there. If it doesn't tab it, that means the file is not there. That means you're not in the right place.
I'm not the right directory. But what direction?
Is that a dependency of Pandas? So when you install.
Change your directory.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I think sometimes.
YPXL is a way to read Excel files. Excel files are a closed format, right? A proprietary format. So if you need to read Excel files, you have to install that library separately.
Will remain.
Pandas does not allow you to read Excel files by default. They say, you know what, we allow you to read things that are open source. And that Excel
Did you have to
library
change your directory
is
there?
an add-on.
Or something
You
like
have to
that
install
directory?
separately in order to be able
Is
to
this
read
the
Excel
data?
files.
So
Yeah, so when you install Pandas,
Pandas has the dependencies on scholarship, like they don't encourage a big high Excel for.
Yeah.
some reason, because it's-
yeah, it has there are different libraries that sort of reverse engineer the format and allow you to read the format. But you have to install the package yourself and be responsible for the license and all of that stuff. They don't want to take the responsibility for managing that.
I don't know. That's
And they're very few.
Early
Typically, when something is closed source or requires some sort of agreement to a license or something that you are responsible for, people
Yeah.
usually don't distribute it with their own package.
Congratulations.
Yeah, estimation point, at least all. So yeah, if you have problems installing the next one,
Come on.
you have to install the, so try to read it first.
I didn't do the question.
Yeah.
Excel and then try to read this.
Give me a second, Andy, all right?
So just convert it first.
What else does you want me to do?
Do the tab to install the function. Start typing the read, do the tab.
Zoom, any questions?
I think
Yes.
if you go to the right of the question, there is another thing called row or something.
I like the row, yeah.
What's the row first one?
This would just be to
And I value people know.
and lines.
Oh, I lost that one. Oh, yeah, yeah, what's the other one? Don't have none, and you have to show the number of rows. Wait, they should be labeled as none, or should it be labeled? Filter out.
So the NaN value
NA
that
values.
Pandas puts in there, is that a like specific data type? Okay.
NaN is like, it's not a string.
No.
I'm just getting none opposite of button. Any values defined the value and turns it into NA. Okay, so should I be?
I have a data wrangling task for my project right now that I did like a mock-up of it all like by hand before. And well, no, it was not the right way to do it. And now I'm like, okay, this sucks. So I need to do something better. So this is like perfect.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
The other
just
shit you gotta do?
using Pandas.
Somebody full-fledged data scientist.
Yes, indeed.
Number
Yeah,
of
that's-
rows.
Oh, I don't know if it's that big. It's maybe like 12,000 lines, so that's like pretty.
Very aggressive.
In data science. Yeah, but thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Zoom. We're still here. We're just working on it together in person.
It was just,
think he does something there. So it's really no, I don't know how to fix that, but it's like this.
Wait, you have to print the number of rows. Yeah.
The number of rows. There's a parameter called angles, right? That reads on the
How many people are left here?
So if I do df.shape. There we go. There's 14 rows.
You can't see it, but there are 50 parameters sort of non-related. The solution is full of errors that want to back to back. Okay. Cool. Moving on. Wrangling data frames. So most of our job as data scientists will be to wrangle data. Here we'll talk about how you can select individual columns, how you can subset a data frame, and how you can sort a data frame. Data wrangling, what is it? So this is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot. You ask a data scientist, what do you do? Oh, I data wrangle. I wrangle data. What does it mean? Well, here, this really nice, concise definition is the process of cleaning, transforming, and mapping data from various sources into a format that can be used for analysis or modeling, and you can read the rest. But this is what data wrangling is, and it's basically the big bulk of our job. With data frames, you're able to do a variety of tasks such as subsetting, selecting, and sorting on these data frames. These are essential parts of data wrangling. Subsetting refers to extracting a portion of the data. For example, here, if we want to do the first 2 columns or the first few rows, and selecting or subselecting consists of extracting rows based on some sort of condition. Say you want temperatures above 50, say you want heights above 69, pounds above, below 30, something like that. Sorting, as we're all familiar with, is just reordering your data based on some sort of condition that you have it sorted on. To illustrate subsetting, we'll be working with this data set visualized in this data frame, DF. Our handy import pandas as PD. This is important. As someone who just fairly recently learned computer science, you only have to do this once at the very top. You don't do it for every single line, just import it once. We have it here to remind you guys to have PD installed, pandas installed as PD. We read in our CSV, like we talked about, and we got right here. And then we have our index column set as sample ID. Here we are displaying just the first 2 rows of it. When we're subsetting columns, we can do something as simple as your data frame, brackets, and then the column name that you want. So we want the pH from this entire data set. So we just simply did df brackets, your string, column name, pH. Selecting rows. Selecting rows are a little trickier than columns. Not tricky, just trickier. You have 2 options. You have .lock and .ilock. Both are required. Both will require some sort of information to extract rows and columns based on which method you use. For example, if we wanted just rows 0 and 2, we could do df.ilock 0 and 2, rows 0 and 2. For that data set, that data frame, 0, 2. Cool. So ilock, what is it? In general, you're subsetting rows using a row index and a column index, as opposed to lock, which uses column names, headers names, etc. A way I used to, or usually remember it to differentiate, is I for index. Here you can see that we can either feed it single numbers, so just row 1, column 2, or we can take an array of numbers saying I want row 1 and columns 1, 2, and 3. We can get even fancier and say, I want rows 0, 4, and 6, columns 1, 2, and 3. Remembering that these shown columns and rows are what we're indexing. Column 1, column 2, column 3. Being press dbar, temp ITS 90, and PSS 78, respectively. When we're using lock, as I mentioned before, we can feed it header names, column names, our headers. So for example, if we want the sample 1, sample 1 is the row, sample 1, and then we want every single column of sample 1, we do df.lock, give me sample 1, and then all the columns of sample 1. That was really confusing. Anyone have questions? Can I clarify that? Take another swing at it. No? Okay, I'm just gonna move on then.
Arjun has a question.
I don't understand. Can you back to it?
Yes.
What is sample 1?
Sample 1. Sample 1 is our row.
Oh, it's your row.
What it is indexed by that name. So we want row called sample 1. Yes.
Does it like kind of by default transpose it like that under, because it's like was a row, but now it's like it's kind of representing it as a column via the output, right? Because that was like, that's the first row, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, but now it kind of like default just sends it out as a column. Is that just kind of like how it normally does it, or am I?
It's just how it's visualized, but it's still,
Okay,
it's a series, which is a list. So a
Okay.
series, you can think of it as a list, and the list can be displayed either in row format or in column format, it doesn't really matter. Right, but essentially you can think of it as a by-column list with elements in it.
okay.
Did everyone get that? Question was, has it transposed our data set? It hasn't. It's just displaying it in this human readable format for us. Did that answer your question? Sort of. Okay. Subsetting using lock. So in general, when we subset using lock, we give it a row label, column label, as opposed to ilock, which was row index, column index. We can, again, do single labels or a list of labels in an array. The example we used earlier was we want the row sample 1, and we want every single column from it. The splice operator, low colon. This one's important for a little shortcut. Instead of giving it an entire list, you want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. You can use our splice to help us conditionally take separate chunks of our list. Splicing can be a little complicated to remember which side is which and which one means which, but here are some notes. So say you have X to Y, you want to take the splice of your list from X to Y, not including Y, that's important. If you take X colon, nothing after the colon, then you're taking from X to the end of the list. Y is taking everything from the beginning all the way to, but not including Y. And then finally, if we just use our splice operator, it will give us our entire collection. What does that mean? Here's an example. So here we have X, A, B, C, D, E, and we're taking a splice of this list from 1 to 4, not including 4. So A would be 0, B is 1, etc. So we're taking B, C, D, and we're not including 4, which would be E. Does that make sense? Zoom? Cool. Here, we want to take everything after 1. So B, C, D, E, all the way to the end of the list. And here we're taking everything with just our splice operator. There's a nice little shortcut, I suppose. If you do df dot, you hit tab, like Dr. Belcade mentioned earlier, you'll get a bunch of different options you can use with the data frame. One of them is columns, and it'll just show you what your columns are. So for this particular data set, df, we have these columns. And then we can mix it up. So we can use lock sample 1, and instead of saying df.columns like we were earlier, we can simply give it the splice operator. Hey, I want this row, I want everything in that row. Some differences, as I keep mentioning, lock relies on names and ilock relies on indices. You can use either or depending on what you're trying to achieve, but it's important to know that you cannot mix the two. So if you're trying to feed ilock with some column or row labels, you'll return an error. And if you try to feed lock some indices, you'll also return an error. As you can see here. Is that clear to everyone? Okay. For example, this works beautifully. You want sample one, row sample one, you want the columns date, MMDDYY, and PH. For ilock, you can give it row index 0 and column indices 0, 1, and 2. If you try to mix the two, say you want 0 row and you want the columns of 0 row, you'll return an error. Is that clear to everyone? Okay. Another way you can select your data, select from your data frame is to use a conditional operator or conditional expressions. We can say filter on, or not filter, but rather show us which part of the data frame has less than 380 for the column press D bar. You can also do all of our other conditional expressions, less than, greater than, equal, etc. If we were to input this command, we would get the following, because all of these true, false, true, true will tell us which ones are less than 380. To be more clear, these are rows. And these are the ones with either true, it is less than 380, or false, it is not less than 380 in the press D bar column. Another neat way that I haven't really seen too often is you can give your data frame an array or a list of Booleans. It's a little more cumbersome. In this example, you take true, true, meaning you want the first 2 rows, and then false, false, false for everything else. You can see why this is cumbersome. You wouldn't want to do this all the time. It's a nice little diagram of what we're talking about. Here, instead of selecting, which we were doing earlier, if you can remember, we did df column name less than 380. We're subsetting. We're extracting that specific portion of the data frame. And instead of just this little column of true, false, true, we're actually displaying which values of our data frame have press D bar values less than 380. Sorting, almost there. So sorting is, as the name implies, sorting your data frame on a given condition. So in this example, or not in this example, we can sort index or sort by values. We can either give it a column to sort on or a list of columns to sort on. And by default, index and values are sorted in ascending order. For example, this is sorting on index, which it does by default. And this is sorting by values of press D bar. As you can see, ascending order. 239 at the top, 497 at the bottom. Here is descending order with the argument ascending equals false. This is us sorting it on multiple columns. So first we'll sort it on pH, and then we'll sort it on press D bar if there are equivalent pH values, rows with equivalent pH values. Cool. I believe we have an exercise. We do. Before we get into our exercise, any questions?
Please. Yeah. So just want to take a minute and contextualize this. Again, what is the key point to retain from this? So 2 major class of functions that you want to do with your data is selected and subset. So subset, as we said, is when you subset your data to contain only a subset of the columns. For example, you want the pH, you want the pressure decibars, the pressure D-bar, or any other column. That's pretty easy. The way you do it is you put your square brackets after the name of the variable that contains the data frame. And if it's only one column that you want, you put the name of that column. If it's a list of columns, you put the list of the names of columns that you use, right? So turns out that there's a more convenient way to do it, and using the iloc and the loc. Using the iloc and the loc is also a way to subset your data. The main difference is that loc takes names of things, location of things, names of things. So if you can, for example, you're going to say sample one because that row is indexed, has an index or has a label or a name that is sample one, and the columns have names. If you don't have names of rows and columns, then you use iloc, and iloc takes, okay, give me a row number 0, or row number 7, or row number 0 and 7, and columns X and Y. So these are the two convenient ways to do it. They'll get you very, very, very far in subsetting your data. The other thing is querying your data. Querying your data is when you use conditionals. So for example, give me the ones for which the pressure is less than this value. And as Andy showed earlier on, one way to subset on the data is using that list of true and false. So how do you trick Pandas into giving you lists or into giving you subsets of rows that match a certain condition? Well, the way you do it is by first setting a condition. Say, for example, data frame d bar is less than 100. That is going to return a bunch of true and false for the rows that have that match that condition. Then you pass that as an input into another call for df. So that's what happens in here. So what happened in here essentially is we can give a list of true and false, but this is useless and cumbersome, as Andy mentioned. So instead of doing that, what you do instead is saying, give me as inside. So look at the internal part. It says, give me from data frame the values, which values are truly under 380. So this part condition here is going to return a list of true or false based on whether the press D bar has a value other than true and false. And then there's another part of df that wraps this whole thing in a way that is very equivalent to what you see here. So the first part is going to return the true and false, which gets embedded inside that second call or the outside call. And that returns the list. And if you look at the values here, they all have pressure. This is the dates and pressure somewhere greater than 280 or less than 280. Which 380. So they all have pressures less than 380. So the last thing is, so pretty much these conditionals here, it shows one condition, but you can combine them using the same sort of and or that you're probably familiar with using Python. So you can write very complex queries to select subsets of your data set using the same approach. You just have to wrap every condition between parentheses. That's also, I think, is a fundamental context to subsets and to select values from data frames.
We're in pretty good time. We'll give you a few minutes to do the exercise. Zoom, if you have any questions, again, drop them in chat or just turn on your microphone. We'll be going around.
We'll take a break after.
And we'll take a break after. That's exciting.
Yeah.
That Burkina that's that's ordering vegetables online. 2012.
So we've just reached 3:15. If you have no questions for the exercise, then please feel free to take a break. We will reconvene about 3:25.
Is there pizza coming out? I want Domino's.
I know.
And this cardboard and recycling.
No.
For $9, you get a pizza.
I've never had it.
Oh my God.
Honestly, can't make promise.
Oh.
No, I see right through the commercials. How is that guy throwing a pizza up in the air and stabbing with a spear and it's staying? This place.
You gotta
Here, that's card got a point.
there's one of
The mascot and the logo. Yeah. Definitely proves their pizza.
Next time.
You should. So you could ask to get Whole Foods pizza. Yeah, Papa John's, fine charge, right?
How much is the pizza?
No. I love Papa J's. Yeah, Pizza Hut, Papa J's, Domino's. You're so close with Papa John that you just go by Papa J. Yeah, we go way back. We go way back. Is the rest of exercises, Andy?
Maddie's gonna go over our things, slightly more complicated things to do with diagrams. Like how to avoid this with the files that's not
Or, I will say this is an organized workshop. For Mr. Humphrey, we're not gonna get what has to be done with this part. Really? You got it. So he. He's gonna teach the rest of the workshop. Just pass the baton. Group chat. And never said what the purpose of the group chat is. I think it's there, but. That's fine to die. Yeah, all I know is that she does, but. You know. That's the 2500. I was meant to send by some more free out in here later. Wow, to the point having without even a guide. No point. You have not. I won't be. Yeah. You won't answer for it. Yeah, once you start. You got time to do that? Yeah, people like around the little like link there in the back. You don't want me to. That'll work. Like there, like little it works. No, the link here is like. That's a shutter. Next one is that from analysis. No, which one? It was that from Wrangling. No, I just did that. Next one is that from analysis. Next.
Okay. I'll cover the solution to this one very quickly, just to give you an idea how I would go about answering this question. So we know that we want to subset the data frame. So we have this data frame. If I look at the data frame right here, it looks like it has a bunch of columns where we're interested in two columns. We're interested in a column that's called sales channel and a column that's called order priority. So we want sales channel to be offline or online, and we want order priority to be high. So one way I would do this is by just tackling each one of these separately. So I'd say, okay, I want sales channel, which is, I'm indexing into this column, sales channel, and I want this to be equal to online. Okay. Okay, I got my condition. So this returns a bunch of true or false. And I want, and that's what we can feed into the other data frame. So if I do just something like this, wrap this into a square brackets and pass it to data frame, this would only return the sales channels for which the value is online. But I also have another condition, which is I want the order priority to be H, to be high. So I would add another condition, and I'll tweak that condition separately and say, the sales channel not sales channel, or order priority to be H. And so that also returns this data frame. I can subset it into df here, and returns only the conditions for which df is high, is h high. So one trick to combine both, as Andy put in this syntax right here, is to put the first condition between parentheses, put the ampersand and. So if you use pandas, typically you're familiar to the keyword and, but not the ampersand. It turns out that in pandas, to combine two conditions or multiple conditions, you use the C-like syntax, or other programming languages use this syntax instead. This stands for and, the bar stands for or, and the exclamation point stands for not, so to negate a condition. So all I have to do now is I have to put the first condition in the first place, or maybe here. That's my second condition. Put the second condition here. Put the first condition in the first place. So this is the third condition in the first place. And that's pretty much it. Now, if I just do this without any sorting method, this will return all the values for which the sales channel is online, the order priority is H. The rest is you just want to sort, so all you have to do at the end is add the sort on values, and you want to specify the column on which you want to sort. So whenever you have something that's a little bit more complex, just break it down into subset, into specific operation, and combine those in a way that allows you to make complex selects. Okay, we're going to move on. I'll move on to data frame analysis. So we've covered reading complex data. We've covered subsetting the data, selecting data using lock and ilock, sorting the data. Now we're going to talk about something a little bit more fundamental, which is common to Python and programming languages in general, but very useful to be familiar with. And that's the fact that data frames are essentially language objects, right? As in objects that you can apply things to, methods or and that have attributes as well. So what I mean by that is, in Python in general, an object typically has a bunch of accessors or attributes that carry some information about the object. Like, for example, how many rows it has, or how many columns it has, but also has methods that allow you to do something on the data. So the attributes allow you to get some information. Methods allow you to do something on the data. I mean, that data frames and series, which is a series basically is just a single column or a row, but we tend to think of it in Excel-like fashion, where we have a data frame as being the Excel sheet and columns as being the series. So we have a bunch of useful attributes, and an example, for example, is shape, which is just an attribute that returns what is the number of rows by number of columns. That's the shape of the object. Or what is the size, which returns an integer or a number representing the number of elements in this object. Or the data types, D types, right? Those are all attributes, so they carry, you can think of it as my first name and last name. Those are my attributes, as opposed to methods, which are things that I know how to do. I know how to code in Python. I know how to, jump or whatever it is, right? So again, the best way to see what's available, let's say that's available, is by doing the name of the variable .tab. The tab lists all the things that are available. Some of them are attributes, some of them are methods. So here's an example. So here we're accessing, what is this? So is this an attribute or a method on df? Why? No parentheses, right? So we said that attributes are things like my first name and last name, and methods are things that have parentheses because they allow me to do some function like jump or write code. Same thing here. This is another attribute. So it turns out that you have dozens of attributes on each data frame, or on a data frame, or an object of type series that allow you to get information about that data type. So for example, what are the columns on that data frame? What are the names of the columns? And it shows me the name of the columns. And the break here is just, I don't know, unfortunate, but it's just a list, right? A list of elements that contains the name of the columns. And one of the useful things that is often sort of a friction point is the data types. So data types is also an attribute. If I type data types, it tells me the types of the columns that Pandas by default was able to infer. So when I read this thing here, it read every column as some specific data type. But it just turns out that it also read this column that I know is a date, as month, day, year, as a number. And what it did, it even truncated and it removed the zero in the beginning, the non-significant zero in the beginning, and stored it as a number. The way that I know it's a number is because when I look at it, it tells me that it's an integer of type 64. So 64 is just the size of the RAM, the size in RAM that that object occupies. It pertains to the precision that is allocated to store that integer. But I know that it's an int, right? It's just normal Python. So these are some of the basic data types in Pandas and their equivalents in Python. So strings in Python are referred to as objects. Ints are ints of different precisions, but by default, it will store something that looks like an int as an int 64, floats as float 64, and bool and datetimes are pretty much the same. Datetimes are what I would have liked my column to be, but unfortunately, it did not recognize it as a datetime. It thought it was a column. So as we've done so far, we've subsetted data, but we haven't modified data. And it turns out that data frames are static objects. You cannot automatically, let's skip that. The best way to modify your data for transparency and reproducibility is to add new columns and remove all the columns, as opposed to overwriting existing columns. So what we can do is we can take that column that was read as an integer, and we can say, hey, reformat this column such that it's a datetime. And there's a very convenient function in the Pandas package called datetime. And this function toDateTime takes a list of values, a column values of Pandas data frame, and the format in which I want to convert that string. And so here, for example, I could say, take the column that's called datetime, day, year, and format it as %m, %b, %y. %m, %b, %y is just standard Python syntax that says the format is 2 numbers for month, 2 numbers for year, for day, and 2 numbers for year. And actually, this % here is just a formatting sort of format indicator. So you can look at the formats under the datetime function in Python. So that's what we do. We say pandas or pd dot toDateTime. We pass it the column that we want to convert, and we pass it the format in which we want to convert. So notice that this is not a method of this object, of the df. This is a function on p, right? So it's not something that I know how to do. Maddie.writeCode, Maddie.jump, Maddie.something. This is something that Pandas know what to do. So it's a function of the package Pandas, as opposed to other functions we're going to see in the future. So that's what I was referring to earlier on. So essentially what we're doing here is we are taking this Pandas datetime, passing it the column that we want to convert, and passing it the format in which we want to convert it. From the previous slide, you saw that this actually returns a properly formatted datetime. So if you just print this, it shows that the name is, this is the name of the column, and now the D type, the data type, is now datetime 64, right? And what we do is we assign it to a new variable name or a new column name called date. So just do df. This does not exist. Just like when you assign to a dictionary or a key value kind of data structure in Python, I'm going to create a key that's called date, which is a column name, and I'm going to assign the value returned by this object on the right side into this date. And that's the proper way, as I mentioned, to maintain reproducibility, is not modify things directly in the table, but to create new things and remove the unnecessary things. So now I can create this new column and I can drop df.drop again. And notice that df here applies directly to drop applies to df. That means it's a method of df. So df knows how to drop things from itself. As we're not calling pd.drop. And I'm telling it the name of the column that needs to drop. So columns equals, and you can pass a single or a list of columns that you want to drop. And you see that now when I do df.dtypes, you see that I have a single date that is of type datetime 64. So this is what my column looks like. The last value here is my date, and it has the proper format. So said that we have attributes, we have methods, you have dozens of methods. So when I showed this function here, so if I do df dot and I press tab, I import, df dots, I did not, yeah. So these are all methods. So you see my cursor here, how small it is? These are all methods or attributes available. There are methods to compute something to the power or to plot things. We're going to see plotting. We're going to see functions like n largest, the mode, the minimum, the maximum, the median, the mean, and so on and so forth. These are all methods that a data frame knows how to run, how to execute. And you call on an object of type data frame. So some examples are head. You've seen head before. We did not explain it, but it's essentially a way to see a subset of your data. Instead of, if you have a data frame that contains 100,000 rows and you type df, a bunch of those rows are going to be displayed, you're going to be overwhelmed. If you want to just inspect what the data looks like, typically you're going to use something like head. By default, it shows you 5 lines, but you can pass it a parameter like head 5 or 6 or 7, and it will show you that number of lines instead. Tails does the same thing. So this one shows the top 5, or n by default is 5. Tails shows you the last 5. The other ones are pretty straightforward. Min and max are going to compute the min and max column wise. Sum, mean, standard deviation, and variance will compute the sum, the mean, standard deviation column wise. N largest returns the largest n, where n is a value that passes as a parameter. So for example, give me the 5 largest values column wise, right? If it's a data frame, it's going to do it column wise. If it's a series is a single column of a data frame. The rest is pretty straightforward. Count, value counts, and describe. Describe is a useful one because it allows you to run a bunch of functions or a bunch of methods on a single data frame. It's going to compute count and mean and standard deviation and a bunch of other things. So all of these methods, instead of having, in addition to having a lot of possible methods, each method can be changed. The behavior of each method can be changed. For instance, I could say mean, but I could say, hey, ignore non-numerical values. And this is useful when you try to run, for example, df.mean on a data frame. It's going to try to compute all the mean of all the columns. And it's going to see that some columns doesn't make sense to compute a mean of, right? So if you have some string values, days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, there's no average, right? So it's going to spit out this future warning saying, hey, in the future, something's going to happen. They're going to change pandas, and this syntax will no longer be valid. So you have to specify numeric underscore only equals true to avoid this warning. So actually, I ran this as an output before I added numeric only, and I forgot to rerun it again to avoid that numeric only. So that's the proper output with numeric only. So here, essentially, instead of applying df to a whole data frame, I'm applying it to a single column. How do I access the single column? Subsetting, right? So square brackets after the name of the data frame, put the name of the column that I want to access, or a list of the columns that I want to access, and add the method .mean. And this returns the mean specifically of dbar. Describe, as we said earlier on, is a useful function that allows you to compute a bunch of things at the same time. So it returns a bunch of statistics. So for example, if my data frame is this one, so we're working with a slightly different data set. I'm going to describe what the columns mean in a future notebook. But if I do something like df.describe and then I say include all, so run this describe on all the columns, And it's going to return something like the following, where, this is a small data frame that only has 8 rows in it. It tells me that there is 8 rows, 8 of them are unique. NaN is missing value or not a number, right? So this unique only looks at things that are categorical. For example, how many unique values do I have in a column that is day of the week, right? If the days of the week is Monday, Tuesday, all the way to Sunday, then I have 7 possible unique values. So this is telling me that the sample ID, which is an index, right? It's an ID, has to be unique. And I said that there are 8 values, 8 rows in my data frame, so this has to be 8, right? It does not count unique values, so it's going to apply the function to only those columns that have the specific data type. So it's going to compute the frequency, the mean standard deviation. So this is extremely useful typically when you load in the data, you don't know what the data looks like. You don't know which ones are categorical variables, how many unique values you have, what is the average value, what is the standard deviation. It's a very cool way to quickly assess whether you have some outliers, whether you have data that sort of is well behaved, and so on. Okay, so we covered the following key points. We've seen that data frames and series have a plethora, have a ton of attributes and methods that you can run. And one way to see what those methods are is by obviously looking at the Python Pandas documentation or by using the tab. And one very, very cool way to see what those methods do. So I showed you that you can do df, and you say, for example, oh, what does this ABS do, right? So I can just press enter. It's going to type it for me, add a question mark at the end, and run this cell. You can run the cell by pressing play or by doing shift enter, and this returns a description, a help for this function. So essentially this ABS returns a series data frame with absolute numeric value of each element. So it's going to take a column or series, and it's going to apply the absolute value to each one of the values. So this thing here, or sometimes help also works, returns a description of what the method does. But my preferred way is to do the question mark. So this is the trick to figure out what methods and what attributes are available. We saw that D types is a useful sort of concept to be aware of. It's a source of a lot of friction sometimes. Imagine you have a column that is, for example, sales total, right? And sales total, and you want to see how much it costs on average to, or what is the average sale, right? And you're computing the average, it's giving you an error. You're looking at the first 5 lines, the last 5 lines, everything looks normal. But lo and behold, somewhere in that 100 million rows that you have, there is a dollar sign because someone entered that information or it was not properly cleaned and had a dollar sign. Obviously, what's going to read the data, that column, because it has a dollar sign, will never be interpreted as a float. It will be interpreted as a string. And so when you see data types, you can say, oh, that's strange. This is supposed to be a sales total, but it is a string. Let me inspect. You could run some analyses to figure out which is the offended value and change that to remove the dollar sign and convert your data type into float and do all your analysis afterwards. All right, so I'm going to break here. I'm going to stop here. There is an exercise. Is there an exercise on this one? Which one was this? Okay. So again, for this one, I think there's an exercise. Yeah, there's an exercise, one single exercise, the answer at the bottom. But try to do it based on what we've covered so far. There is more information about. Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, there's more information at the top. Is this a single exercise, or is more next? Yeah, there's more information about D types at the top. I don't remember what this is. You don't need the information at the top. Okay, so it's a self-contained exercise. Try to do it based on what we've covered so far. Thanks. Take 5 minutes to, I'll give you 5 minutes to do it. The data frame that we're using is defined all the way at the top. So run the cells that says import pandas and PD as PD and df equals pd.read CSV. And you'll have all the information that you need to complete the exercise, or the data that you need to complete the exercise.
You gotta go up to the top and.
Yeah.
That frame analysis is
This is variable and.
Yeah, that's right. So if you first thing you do, pull it up, find yeah, equals. So if those two cells, the local data, you have to import the pandas data frame first. So just run this cell and this. It does not know what P is, so you have to import it first. That's
fine. Just keep having import pandas.
oh, I thought you installed it. Yeah. Just create a cell block. Yep. So that creates the cell block. Yep. Okay, perfect. So install. Yep. Install. That is. And just name that. Next. So this. Okay, go first. Right, so you can go all the way to the bottom and I'll answer that question. Here, yes, right here. The first thing I do is this is like a P, this idea there. Remove that answer, idea, choose enter, run. So now we have this structure. We want to make the 5 largest values of this column and average them. So first thing we want to do is take the 5 largest, which is function that you get with n largest. And n largest is a method of so this tells what the function is, but we didn't call it right. So the question mark, says this thing here. So these two things. It's n. It's the columns that you want to see the largest. So n is how many largest? It's the n largest, or the 3 largest, the 4 largest, the 7 largest, the 100 largest. In your case, you want 5 largest. So you pass it between parentheses the values that you want to multiply. What's date or time attachments? From theirs. Okay. Yes.
We have linked them now computers. So when working with pandas, suppose we know that a column won't contain more than certain values. Like suppose a number won't go over 100. Then can we limit, like change the data type to int?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, D type, just like we did earlier on, you can say D type and change the data type of that column to whatever you want, an int 16 or int 8 or whatever.
The column and remove the previous column?
Yeah.
That's the preferred behavior.
For reproducibility. I mean, obviously, if you have a lot of data, well, if you create another column, it's going to create another copy of your data, which is not preferred. If you have a lot of data, and if you have huge data to the point that it's not fitting in your computer, maybe you should be using something like Dask as opposed to Pandas, which is something similar but fit for big data, for larger data.
Okay, we're gonna try to solve this together again. So what we want, we have this data frame. We want the n largest values where n equals 5. And we're going to take those 5 top or largest values and average those values. So the way we would do it is by taking, an easy way to do it is by doing this n largest question mark. It says that this n largest takes 2 things. It takes n, which is n is the number of rows to return. So I want 5. So I'm going to set n to 5. And columns is the label or list of labels of the columns that I want to compute the n largest for. So in this case, I want the 5 largest values. So I'm going to say n equals 5, or just, I don't have to say n equals 5. Just say 5. And the columns, I want this column, which is simply the temp ITS 90. So this returns the 5 largest values, so from 0 to 4. And all I have to do now is compute the mean, right? So this, if I do dot mean, what will happen if I do the mean as such? What will happen? What does the mean do?
Isolates it from all columns.
It computes the mean of all the columns, right? But that's not what I want, right? So I only want 1 column. So how do I get that 1 column from this data set?
Subsample.
Subset.
Subset.
Yeah. Subsample is another method that you can do on a data frame. But subsample, or subset, all I have to do is say, okay, now this thing here is going to return a data frame. Get me or grab only the temp ITS 90 from this column. And now it's only returning that column. Now I can compute the mean on it, right? And so the mean of the top 5 values is 14 point something, right? Make sense? Okay, so I'm gonna run through the next slides. I'll give you as much time, we're over already. If you wanna stay a little bit longer, you're welcome to. If you wanna do this on your own, the solutions are provided at the end of the Jupyter Notebooks, and you're welcome to, I think everyone here is on Slack. So you're welcome if you go home later and you don't understand the solution to post on Slack, and we can help you with that. But let me just walk you very quickly through the notebooks. So these are 2 kind of real world-ish examples, still trivial, but the data here comes from the Hawaiian Ocean time series, the HOT time series. It was collected since 1988 from Station Aloha, which is located just north of Oahu and where this red dot is. So the data has a bunch of, it's actually the table that I showed earlier on. It has a bunch of columns, and it consists of samples that were collected from the ocean using some sort of bottled experiments, or I don't know what it's called, but essentially it has a bottle ID, it has the date, it has pressure in decibars, and it has a bunch of other columns. It consists of 20,000 samples, so 20,000 rows, and the data set needs to be cleaned up. So if you look at the data, it looks something like the following, which obviously it doesn't show. I'm going to open it in Jupyter Notebook. It got truncated. Which one is this? Clean up, right? So the data set looks like the following. And if you look at the data, it has a bunch of -9 values, and it turns out that -9 is how the scientists who collected the data decided to encode missing values. And it turns out that it also has an empty column at the end. The whole column is just empty, and it was translated as missing values, doesn't have a header. So a few things that we need to do is, among other things, remove the completely empty column, or drop the column. We have to indicate to Jupyter, or to Pandas in this case, that -9 is a missing value. What else do we need to do? We need to remove the empty columns, specify that -9 is missing value. The date is incorrectly inferred. Again, the same data we use, so we need to fix the date. We need to set the index as bot ID. So the bottle ID is the index. So here you see that the index by default, when you read a data frame, the index is a numerical integer from 0 to n-1. So it sets a default index to it. And that prevents you from using the lock function. Remember that lock uses a name, right? But it turns out that this row, bottle ID, is a unique identifier for every row. And we can use this and say, hey, give me the sample, which ID is 21902000124, right? Or give me the row, if I was working with students, whose student ID is 177621, right? But I can't do it. So we have to set this as an index, so we're able to do it later. What else are we gonna do? We're gonna change the column order. We don't like the order in which these columns appear. So we want to change the order to a different column order that we're gonna provide. And that's it. So this is just the cleanup. These are a few steps that are important when you're cleaning up your data, and very realistic. These are things that you do when you have real data sets. So that's the exercise that you need to do. The answer is all the way at the bottom of the notebook. But if you have any questions, post your questions on Slack. We're going to stay a little bit longer if you decide to stay, both either on Zoom or in person. The second notebook pertains to analysis. Now that you have taken your data set and you cleaned it up, how can you analyze that data set? And this is the cleanup. Oh. The analysis, in this case, we're going to look at two things that you want to do. So these are things that we haven't seen, but we're going to introduce in the Jupyter Notebook. One of them is plotting. So it turns out that there is a very convenient function called plot, a method called plot. So when you say, hey, data frame, plot something, it's a method of data frame, and it's a proxy for a very large library that's called Matplotlib. So there's a full workshop on plotting on March 24th. You'll learn a lot more about plotting, but for the convenience of just quickly showing some data, you can have access to that .plot method on data frames. The other one is a very important one, is a group by. And group by is a way to aggregate information. So say, for example, we have this time series, and the time series looks super ugly. So if I was to plot, so this is what I was referring to earlier on, data frame, same data as before, .plot, you give it two things here, or three things. The x-axis, which is the date. Remember, date is a unique date element. The temperature, I want to see the temperature on the y-axis, and the kind of plot I want to generate. You can set, for example, line or scatter plot. Here I'm choosing a line plot, and it generates this very dense, overwhelming plot. And so how about, instead of showing all the values, how about I aggregate the values for you? So rather than showing the temperature on January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd, January 4th, I don't care about all of that. How about I choose all the temperature in 1988, all the temperature in 1999? So essentially what I'm doing, I'm taking my very large data set, I'm chopping it up into subsets that are all similar based on the dates, 1988, 1989, and so on and so forth, and aggregating the data, applying a function to aggregate the data and compute the average temperature for every single year, and then plotting that data through the year. So essentially, that's what you're going to do. Here, just an example of something that shows a scatter plot instead of a line plot. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to plot the data in a way that shows only years, right? That's the exercise. And you're going to see that by aggregating at such a coarse level, which is just the year, we lose a lot of information, which is the monthly variation in my data. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in temperature between January and December. Temperature goes up and down and up and down, so we lose that seasonality. So instead of aggregating on a single value, which is the year, we can aggregate on two things, our year and the month. And so now, instead of grouping our data by simply year, now we make small chunks that are all
equal on year and month. Give me all the temperatures in January 1988, February 1988, and aggregate the data as such, and plot data. So group by is a very, very powerful function. And actually, it's a method, right? It's a method of the object, and very useful for splitting the data somehow and doing some operation on the resulting chunks, right? So for example, if I was analyzing data from some geographic regions and I have Boston and New York and Honolulu, I can say group by city and do something on the resultants of chunks of the city, and so on and so forth. That's also a very important concept, or the idea here was to introduce high-level concepts. I would say plotting and group by are super useful concepts to be familiar with when you're working with Pandas. Okay, so I'm gonna let you run through all of this by yourself. I don't think there's anything else that I want to show. Oh, maybe one thing I would like to show. So remember that we have that date column, right? We have a column that's called date. It turns out that that column that is date itself has attributes that you can access. So when I have a column that is date and it's, let's say, 2020. So this is an example of a column that is date. I can't see it here. A column that is for instance, this here is the date. Well, a column that's called date has accessors. So I can say, for example, this column is called, let's say, I'll call the column, just for the sake of avoiding any confusion, I'll call this column X. So I can access the date element of that column, and I can access the month by simply doing .month or .year or .day or .day of the week. And I can return all that information under various formats. So for example, I can convert it into a label that says Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. It tells me what day that date was. Or it says day number 0, which is Sunday, number 1, which is a Monday or Tuesday. Or just simply the 1st or the 2nd or the 27th or 28th and so on and so forth. So all of these accessors are available as attributes on your data. So if I do something like the following, surface sample.dates.dt.year. So this shows us something else we haven't covered, and I'm using the slides from someone who prepared this last year, but this is a completely different notation. So earlier on, I said that we can access the data using something like the following. I could do, for example, this one, was it? Yeah, df. So I could do df, shows me the columns in df, and I could do something like ph. So I could do df.ph. Turns out that when you have words that are a single, or column names are a single word, I could do something like the following directly. And it does the same thing. So I can access the dotted notation or the dot notation. df.ph is equivalent to df square brackets ph. Those are pretty much the same thing. So here, what this code is doing is accessing this table. We called it before df. He's calling it now surface_samples dot date. So accessing the column date, and within that column say, hey, give me the date object, which is a dt, and from this dt object, give me the year, or give me the month, or give me the day of the week, or give me whatever accessors that we want. All right, so I'll stop here. I'll let you work